Chancellor of Poland was one of the highest officials in the historic Poland. This office functioned from the early Polish kingdom of the 12th century until the end of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795. A respective office also existed in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania since the 16th century. Chancellors' powers rose together with the increasing importance of written documents. In the 14th century, the office of Chancellor of Krakow evolved into the Chancellor of the Crown, and from that period the Chancellor powers were greatly increased, as they became responsible for the foreign policy of the entire kingdom. The Chancellor was also supposed to ensure the legality of monarchs' actions, especially whether or not they could be considered illegal in the context of Pact Conventa. Finally, the Chancellor was also responsible for his office, the Chancellery. A 16th-century Polish lawyer, Jakub Przybylski, described the Chancellor as the king's hand, eye and ear, translator of his thoughts and will. From 15th century onward there were two separate Chancellor offices, none of them subordinate to each other: Great Chancellor and Deputy Chancellor. In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, there were four chancellors: Great Chancellor of the Crown, Great Chancellor of Lithuania, Deputy Chancellor of the Crown, and Deputy Chancellor of Lithuania. History. During the times of fragmentation of Poland, each Polish prince had his own chancellor, but with the reunification of Poland, the office of Chancellor of Krakow became dominant and other local chancellors disappeared by the early 15th century. Also, in the 15th century, the Chancellor's office was split into that of the Great Chancellor and Deputy Chancellor. The Deputy Chancellor was, however, not a subordinate of the Chancellor, and his independence was specifically confirmed by the laws passed during the reign of King Alexander I Jagiellon. The Sejm of 1504 confirmed the Chancellor's office as well as its powers and responsibilities for the first time, specifically stating that one person cannot hold both Chancellor's offices, and established the Grand Lithuanian Chancellor's office. The Lithuanian Deputy Chancellor was created later, in the mid-16th century after the Union of Lublin in 1569. There were four chancellors. At first, the Chancellor's office was always given to an ecclesiastic person. From 1507, Sigismund I the Old decided that the title of Great Crown Chancellor would be rotated between secular and ecclesiastic nobles, and at least one chancellor was required to be a secular person. Power and responsibilities. Chancellors, as most of the other offices in Poland and later the Commonwealth, were nominated to the office for life by the king during the same session. From 15th and 16th centuries, after the reforms of Alexander, Sigismund I and the Union of Lublin, the power and importance of the Chancellor's office was stabilized as a senatorial office, lesser than that of the hetmans and the grand marshals, but more important than that of the treasurers, court-martial and others. By custom, the Greater Chancellor of the Crown directed the Commonwealth foreign policies towards the West, Western Europe and South Ottoman Empire, while the Greater Chancellor of the Lithuania the policies towards the East, Muscovy. The Chancellor and Deputy Chancellor were responsible for the work of their chancelleries, respectively Greater and Minor. They were supposed to be in constant contact and develop common policies. Since the powers were equal, they were specifically forbidden from issuing illegal and contradictory documents, and could judge any documents contrary to the existing law irrelevant and without power. In theory, the power of the chancellors were equal. In practice, much depended on the personalities and political influence. Conflicts between chancellors, while rare when it occurred, could paralyze the entire country. This was the case during the conflict between Krasław Zkurowsek and Maciejewski between 1501 and 1503. Among their other responsibilities were the matters of foreign policy and, to a smaller extent, internal affairs, as they had also judiciary powers, presiding over the assesses courts, that were the highest appeal courts for people subjected to crown laws. They could judge in various cases, with the exception of when the sides had already reached a compromise or in cases of territorial disputes. The Chancellor's offices were the Chancelleries. Chancelleries were staffed with officials known as the Chancellorists. The regent, secretaries, writers, archivists, metricians, and other clerks. The regent divided the work between the clerks. 2 secretaries presented prepared letters to the king for his signature. Writers designed the letters, clerks readied the final drafts. No copies were made, but were instead entered in the archives, books called metrics, who were taken care by the 2 metricians. The metrician of the Great Chancellor was called the Great Metrician. One serving the Deputy Chancellor was a minor metrician. The Chancellery staff had no wages, just like the Chancellors. But in the middle of each reception room was the box into which all clients were supposed to deposit a varying amount of money, and nobody who planned on coming back could afford to be mean. Of much smaller importance were the local, provincial chancelleries, which mostly served as archives for copies of various documents. Besides their official functions, the royal chancelleries functioned as a kind of semi-official, very prestigious schools. The officials of the chancelleries, who often started the work after the studies, after several years of work, often went forward in the administrative hierarchy, are often reaching important posts of bishops or other ecclesiastic or secular offices. Many enlightened chancellors did not restrict the positions in the staff to nobility, and often sponsored intelligent applicants from other social classes, not only by hiring them to the chancellery but by paying for the studies at universities in Poland and abroad. Among the most esteemed graduates of chancelleries were Jan Długosz, Martin Kromer and Jan Zamoyski. The chancellor often gave speeches representing the royal will. The symbol of their office was the seal, which was used to seal all documents passing through his office. He also sealed documents signed by the monarch and could refuse to seal a document he considered illegal or damaging to the country. When the king died, the seal was destroyed during funeral and a new one given to him by the succeeding king. The seal's importance gave a rise to another name for the chancellor, the sealer. Due to their important power, the chancellors were considered the guardians of the king and country, making sure a king's folly would not endanger the country by forcing it into an unnecessary war. The chancellor's powers combined with the fact that wars required funds which were given by the Senate. The nobles who controlled the Senate were usually unwilling to increase taxes and levied upon them, which meant that Poland very rarely declared wars on its own. Usually it was attacked by its neighbors, and while it repelled all attacks till the end of the 18th century, it almost never utilized any of its victories. The army was undermanned and under-equipped, and lands of rich Pospolita were constantly ravaged by new invasions, crippling its economy. Other chancellors. Besides the crown and deputy chancellors, there were many less important chancellors in the country. There was the chancellor of the queen. He had much less power than other chancellors. He guarded the queen's seal and was the second most important official of her court, after her court-martial. He had no right to a seat in the Senate. Even less important were the chancellors of crown princes and princesses, first introduced around the reign of Sigismund I. Then there was the chancellor of the most important of bishops, primate of Poland, Archbishop of Gniezno. Finally, some proud magnates had officials who titled themselves chancellors. List of Chancellors. Chancellors, Chancellor, various local chancellors until late 14th, early 15th century. Chancellor Krakowski, Chancellor of Kraków, until the 14th century, when he superseded all other Polish local chancellors and transformed into Chancellor Korony, Chancellor of the Crown, from the 14th century until 1569. Sometimes also called Chancellor Królestwa Polskiego, Chancellor of the Polish Kingdom, Chancellor Wielkiej Korony, Great Chancellor of the Crown, from 1659 until 1795, Chancellor Wielki-Litewski, Great Chancellor of Lithuania, as above. Podchancellor Korony, Deputy Chancellor of the Crown, as above. Podchancellor Litewski, Deputy Chancellor of Lithuania, as above. Great Chancellors of Poland.